does creating a container for your content mean to you? How would you interpret it or adapt it?
Well, I think you did a great job in the introduction about the challenges that we all face in spreading our innovations or bringing more support in for our work, or even letting the people that should know and that could easily be helped by our work know about our work. And the nonprofit sector, the social service sector, the volunteer sector has never had the resources that the corporate sector has, and that's really only gotten, in some ways it's gotten better, and I'm proud to be part of the internet as my work has been that democratizing force that, certainly 15, 20 years ago it felt much more open that you could have your own channels and communicate directly with people. But at the same time, corporate media has gotten so much more top-down. We're just at a point in Canada, just even last week, where another couple hundred journalists disappeared, newspapers being mashed together. It's just much, much harder to reach the world and to break through in a message against these vested interests that have $20, $50, $100 million to spend on promotions every year. So a lot of what this pattern means is using some of those techniques from corporate persuasion, which a lot of us have studied over the years. I think one thing we've learned in social innovation is that we can go and get a policy changed maybe every now and then. We can get lucky. We can have someone on the inside who agrees with us, or a politician, our issue somehow comes into favor for them, or maybe they're personally touched by it. They have a story in their own lives that means that they feel compelled to act. But if we don't actually change the culture around that, we're in this age of what we call wrecking ball politics, which is the new people come in and they systematically destroy everything that the last government did. And so, unless you have the culture with you, unless you have a public outcry against that happening, then, a lot of the policy progress you've made can be easily lost. Mm-hmm. And the environmental community in particular, just the last thing I'll say about, I approach communications always from a very humble place, or always. I've learned over the years to be much more humble about our abilities, because clearly in the field of environmental protection, you can't say that we've done a very good job of helping slow the destruction of our ecosystems or over the last 20 years. And I don't take that all personally like it's all our fault. We're fighting a whole economic system and a whole mindset of growth and fear around lack. But ultimately, we're not actually winning on a lot of these issues. And so I think it's much better to start these things from a humility place of, wow, it's really hard to change the culture. Wow, these issues are really ingrained. People are really set in their patterns and behaviors around the status quo. So it's much more difficult to change that than we might initially think. Mm-hmm. The world isn't just shaped based on moral and justice concerns. It's often shaped on much more selfish concerns.
Mm-hmm. You've just opened up so much territory that I'm now going to have to assign a priority to my questions to you, and I promise our listeners that we'll follow up on all these streams. Can I just ask you, is there a quintessential example for you of an initiative that kind of fulfills many of the criteria that you've just described? Is there something that you look toward? You have something in mind when you begin, and because our listeners are in the midst of trying to make the world a better place in a variety of ways. Is there a particular strategy, campaign, container, metaphor?
Well, the one that comes to mind that I think a lot of us would know of as a meta story, although many of us don't know the individual elements that made it that meta story, is you look at the history of the gay rights movement, and mostly in the U.S. because it's more extreme culture down there. The wars are so much more intense down there than certainly they are in Canada or a lot of other European democracies. So, you look at the history of that movement, and even as recently as the 2000s looked like it was going backwards. There was a lot of negative, that the wrecking balls were happening. There was new ground that movement had won that was then getting lost, and marriage became this, gay marriage became this real kind of symbolic, like a lot of these issues are. It became this symbolic rallying cry. And whether you agree or don't agree with it, you cannot disagree with the fact that the culture has changed and evolved to the point where, in the last 2 years, really the last year and a half, 2 years is what we've seen it becoming just basically, the younger generation saying, "Oh, this is just normal. This is not a big issue," and it being legalized in many states across the U.S. and federally.